Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our broadcast of current market updates and frequently asked questions of Sax'S Cannabis Advisors. Next slide. Our firm provides the information in this webinar presentation for general guidance only, and it does not constitute the provision of legal advice, tax advice, accounting services, investment advice, or professional consulting of any kind. The information provided herein should not be used as a substitute for a consultation with a professional tax, accounting, legal, or other competent advisors. We recommend that you speak directly with them. Before making any decisions or taking any action, you should consult a professional advisor who is provided with all the pertinent facts relevant to your particular situation. And meet the presenters, myself, Todd Polinack. I'm the partner in charge of the Sax'S Cannabis practice area with my partner, Adam Holzberg, and we'll be presenting today an update as well as some frequently asked questions that were asked of us. So here's the agenda: federal update, state and local update, and we're going to address some of the most common questions that are asked of our advisors within a certain time frame. So this is just kind of skimming the surface, but we do want to come across answering some of your questions that you keep presenting to us. So to begin with the federal update, before I do, just want to let you know that our sources for these updates come from various places that you yourself could check the facts: the Marijuana Moment, Leafly, MJ Biz Daily, and other sources, including the CRC's website and other PowerPoints. So enjoy, and if there's anything that we missed, feel free to point it out. First up, the federal update. As you all know, the Safe Banking Act did fail during the lame duck session. As you know, that there was some hope that safe banking was going to pass, but it does appear that the then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell got wind of it and he squashed it, and then he gloated about it. But latest news is that the new Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer met actually yesterday with GOP senators to discuss marijuana legislation for the new Congress. In the beginning of the month, he did meet with various Democratic colleagues like Senator Booker, Merkley, and Rosen, and the Senate Banking Committee chairman to discuss the possibility of passing some new laws involving safe banking. But now he did meet with Stephen Dane, Ron Paul, and Dan Sullivan, and the purpose was to determine if the lawmakers could find some bipartisan consensus on legislative objectives for cannabis reform for the 118th Congress, with marijuana banking as the key issue that the senators want to pass, and I believe it's going to be called Safe Plus. So we'll see what will happen. It does seem to be some movement in the Senate if we will see safe banking in the near future. As just a note, the majority of American voters, according to a more recent study, shows that, including most Republicans, back federal marijuana legislation and social equity. According to the survey, 65% of voters support the federal legalization of recreational marijuana or cannabis, and the voters also support marijuana policies that prioritize minority communities for dispensary licenses and tax revenue. So maybe the time has come for legalization of cannabis. But over the past couple of weeks, what we've seen in this new 118th Congress is some bills proposed to allow for some medical cannabis patients to get certain rights. As it's seen, one of the first proposed bills was for cannabis patients to be able to purchase and possess firearms. I don't know if you know this, but if you do have a medical license, regardless of what state, you are not allowed to also own or to possess or purchase a gun. And one of the first cannabis reform bills out of the 118th Congress backed by the Republicans, was to change that. It's called the Second Amendment Protection Act. That was also followed by another bill focused to the veterans of the veteran population. Cannabis legislation was introduced so that folks who are veterans could also not be discriminated against if they used cannabis for medical purposes. So two bills that kind of point to the way we're looking at the 118th Congress, what may be proposed in the upcoming year or years. To you, Adam.
Thanks, Todd. Hi, everyone. Just going to go over some non-congressional items. So the FDA has been in the news lately. Essentially what happened there is they were petitioned to consider allowing CBD and CBD-related items to consider within the definition of a dietary supplement. They denied that request. They took it a step further, saying that there needs to be a new regulatory pathway for CBD to be developed. They're passing that off to Congress. So it's kind of a hot potato between Congress and the FDA is now passing it back to Congress for them to work in that framework. So right now we're still in that limbo on regulations for CBD, but that's kind of where things stand there. And then also on Monday, the DEA announced that cannabis products that are created synthetically, such as Delta 8 THCO and Delta 9 THCO, will fall under the Controlled Substance Act. So they are still considered controlled substances, meaning it's illegal. You can't go buy that at any store. So those will not fall under that CBD umbrella. That will fall under the cannabis side, where it's still considered an illegal illicit drug. There was also news today about Twitter. So Twitter has announced they will allow advertising for cannabis companies. So that's a big change. For those in the industry know that cannabis companies really can't advertise anywhere. A lot of the traditional avenues are basically shut off from them. So Twitter announcing, or at least opening doors somewhat. There are some exceptions still, of course, but opening that door is definitely a step forward in that direction. Hopefully they're just the first, and then hopefully the other social media companies will follow suit. But it's definitely a positive step forward for the industry, and especially, like I said, from the marketing side, considering the difficulties there to really get your name and brand out there. And then with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Todd.
Okay, let's do a state and a local update. So more and more states are moving towards legalizing cannabis for both recreational and medical use. But something that's new that we're seeing as a trend is that the state legislators are approving bills to potentially allow cross-border cannabis sales. So this is very interesting. The newest move actually happened yesterday when Washington State, within their House committee, passed a bill that would, if enacted, interstate cannabis trade would be allowed. Now, this would require a policy change at the federal level, either a law that would allow interstate transfer of cannabis between legal businesses, or an opinion from the U.S. Department of Justice allowing or tolerating cannabis commerce across state lines, the bill says. So what you're seeing here is the idea that if there's a state that borders your state that has legal cannabis, maybe we can do some trading. Now, again, there's got to be some changes in the law, but I think you're beginning to see how this is all piecing itself together. So California and Oregon already have adopted these rules, again, pending any type of change in the federal rules. And I think you may recall that last year, the New Jersey state president also filed an interstate cannabis commerce bill. And we'll see what happens from there. Adam?
All right, so talking about what's going on in New Jersey lately. So New Jersey had the CRC met last week, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, gave out some news, some updates about the industry, something direction where things are going. Some interesting points. They announced that there's been over 1,500 applications as of January 20th. Of that, just kind of seeing where the industry and the market is kind of heading. There was almost 900 applications for retailers, 400 about for cultivators, and about 240 for manufacturing. So when you look at the applications, majority of them are going on retail side, followed by cultivation, and then followed by manufacturing. That's typically where you're trying to see where the demand really is for operators. They also gave some other stats. So 72% of the applications were diversely owned, 25% were social equity, and 43% were impact zones. So, I mean, as we all know, New Jersey is trying to push for more social equity and trying to increase that number. So with that said, there is a new grant program that's coming out. So the NJEDA has announced they will be issuing a new cannabis grant program. There are two products, Product 1 and Product 2. They did promise the name will change for that. That's a temporary name. So Product 1 is solely for social equity applicants. For those who received a conditional license, they can apply for this grant. It's up to $150,000. They said they will only be awarding 24 of these, so there is a limited number. But up to $150,000 will be awarded. And as part of this, those who are awarded these grants will also have to go through a technical assistance program as well. The other product is Product 2. This is for all applicants. Anyone could apply for this. This amount is up to $250,000. This is for those who have either a conditional or a standard license, but they have to you have to possess the real estate and have the township approval to be able to apply. They announced that this one, they plan to get it out the door and start relatively soon. They're shooting for late February, early March. So relatively soon, they'll be giving out more details on how to apply for this. And they say, for both of these programs, for these grants, they can be used for similar things. So you listed some examples. So you could use to pay the rent, the mortgage, payroll and wages, compliance expenses, legal and other professional services, utilities, all your working capital needs. They can help fund that. It's just not supposed to be used to, purchase land for construction costs. You can't buy inventory with it. Otherwise, it's going to help you with your other soft costs to really help you get up and going. So we'll see where things end up with that. Like I said, the Product 2, the bigger one, up to $250,000. They did say by the end of this month or early next month. So once we know more, we'll put out some information on that. But right now, that's kind of where things stand with that. So back to you, Todd.
Continuing in the story of the CRC's latest announcement, the license caps and cultivation has been lifted. When the CRC considered the fact that there's only 17 operational cultivation sites in the state of New Jersey, which is the fewest number of cultivation licenses among the 15 states, they did decide to lift the cap. Currently, the canopy, the operational canopy, is estimated at 418,000 square feet, and New Jersey would need nearly 850 more, I'll repeat that, nearly 850 more licenses to meet the national average of cultivator licenses. Currently, New Jersey has one license for every 197,000 residents, far below the national average of 31,000 residents. So we'll be looking to see a lot of folks getting the license in cultivation. There's a great need out there to make up that difference. Also, the CRC announced that the vertical integration restriction is going to be changed. Just to note, prior to February 22nd, 2023, any owner, stockholder, officer, or director of any corporation or any person engaged in the retail sale of cannabis items could not engage in cultivating, testing, manufacturing, wholesaling, or transporting in bulk any cannabis items. But after February 22nd, 2023, a cannabis license holder shall be authorized by the Commission to concurrently hold one cannabis cultivator, one cannabis manufacturer, one cannabis retailer, one cannabis delivery license, concurrently hold one cannabis wholesaler license and one cannabis distributor license, and the expanded ATCs may concurrently hold a cannabis cultivator license, a cannabis manufacturer license, a cannabis retail license, and additional cannabis retail licenses for each satellite dispensary, and a cannabis delivery service license, or a cannabis wholesale license, and a cannabis distributor license. That's a lot, one phrase, but the point is that, folks, now New Jersey is going to allow for vertical integration. I believe that's going to change the way things have been coming together. You're going to see groups beginning to partner together now that you can have vertical licenses. But again, you can only hold one of each that we just mentioned. Adam, back to you.
All right, so CRC also announced some updates on the priority review for the applications. So there's a little background. Right now there's a priority review for social equity, anyone who's going for a testing lab, diversity owned, women owned, or disabled veteran owned. So they are changing that slightly. So basically, before, depending on which bucket you fell in, you kind of went through that hierarchy. Are you social equity, diversity owned, etc. Now what they're doing is social equity, no matter what you're going for, conditional, micro, if you're doing conversion, if you're doing that, just going right for the annual, social equity is going right to the top, followed by the other categories like diversity owned, women owned, etc. So there's a slight change from previously, and this just help those that, especially social equity, get to the top of the list, to give them that extra advantage. The issue still always comes down to you may have a priority review. The issue still comes down for a lot of people in the industry is money, having that capital. That's why they're doing those grant programs now, try to help that. That's still going to be an issue, unfortunately, but there will be that additional priority review for social equity now. And the other item that they announced, so the social equity excise fee, the CRC has been looking into recommendations on what they should really be using the funds for that. They would get for the fee. So they're looking to invest it in various social equity programs, such as economic and community development, justice reinvestment, public health, and workforce development and education. So they're looking for more recommendations on what to really reinvest in. That's kind of the direction that things are heading. So just moving slightly north to New York, just going over what's been going on there. New York's been following along with New Jersey. They're doing things a little differently. They are having some issues. There's been some holds on their process due to some lawsuits over how they're proceeding with things. And that's really hitting them in Western New York. They're still going through and assessing the applications. They really can't issue licenses in certain regions until those lawsuits are settled. And then when you're looking at New York City definitely has an issue of a lot of illicit cannabis shops. It's a very common problem there right now, and they simply don't have the manpower to really crack down on that, to really end that, and then allow the legal market to really grow and develop. So their solution to that right now is to go after the landlords. So they are naming landlords as defendants in any of these cases. They are assessing financial penalties on the landlords. So they're really looking now towards the landlords to kind of help the city crack down on this. That's the direction that that they're going towards. I know it's been tried in other states like California. It wasn't that successful, but they're trying that here right now in New York, kind of put an end to that. We'll, see what happens there, and then we'll go from there. So I'm gonna hand it back to you, Todd.
Okay, we're going to move on to our frequently asked questions. So we're not going to go into deep depth on each of these, folks. We're going to highlight it. We will be covering these FAQs in much more detail in future webinars, but we wanted to at least address some of the more common issues that are coming up with the FAQs. The first one is, what are some common misunderstandings of the application of 280E? So what are some common misunderstanding of, what is a common misunderstanding of the application of 280E? So 280E is the tax code, the IRS tax code that is used, that is applied to cannabis companies. It is something that most people ask us. I think any CPA who's in cannabis is asked this question all the time. So what about 280E? And I'm just going to give you a few things that people do. I don't think they have this right, and I just wanted to address it first. There is no way to get out of 280E. If you hear anyone say you can absolutely avoid 280E, you just need to understand that that is just not the case. That's not true. You can challenge me on that, but that's fine. 280E is the tax code, and in a very succinct way, cannabis companies are not allowed to deduct operating expenses. They can deduct cost of goods sold, but not operating expenses. There are a lot of folks who have suggested ways to shift expenses to other entities. Just want you to know that, as I know I've heard this before, you can do anything you want as long as you don't get caught. I don't agree with that, but the point is that it's not a matter of if you're going to be audited by the IRS, it's a matter of when. So first point is, if you want to shift things around and hide things, it's probably tantamount to tax evasion. If you're never audited and you get away with it, all right, that's one thing. If you are audited and you're caught, it could be considered not only tax evasion, it could also be considered criminal. So be very careful of the advice that you're getting. Make sure that you're actually talking to folks who understand the risk element of this. The IRS doesn't fool around. The way that 280E is interpreted, by the way, there is nothing specifically written, like in the code section, explaining how it's applied. The way it's actually applied is through court cases. So this is what happens. People actually file their tax return, they file it with improper information, and the IRS comes in, audits them. They are fined heavily, perhaps even recommended to a judicial committee, and then it's taken to tax court. They lose, and then that particular tax case is used to interpret all future IRS audits. Now, the second part of this is that some people say, well, then there's no way to make money in cannabis. That's not true. I'm actually going to be speaking at the New Jersey Cannabis Insider event on March 8th, and my topic is how to be profitable without breaking the rules. You can apply the tax law properly. You can be profitable, but you need to understand what you're doing, and you need to understand there are certain things that you cannot do, because what you're really doing is you're just basically avoiding or breaking the rules, breaking the law. If you are caught, you will suffer the consequences. Don't want to be a doom and gloomer, but I just wanted to make sure that my friends out there in the cannabis world understand the risks of this. Consult your CPAs who know the tax code on 280E, and who also want to make sure that you don't end up in orange, because they will also end up in orange with you. So Adam, next question.
All right, next question is, what's the best corporate structure to have when setting up a cannabis company, and why? This is definitely a very common question. So the answer to this was going to go over the different structures that are out there, go over the pros and cons, and kind of, give you what we typically see. So the two main corporate structures you see is a C corporation and a LLC, treated as a partnership. So just kind of over the differences there. The most common really is, though, a C corp. especially for the larger companies. A lot of times, for one, set up an LLC, it's easier, simpler. But C Corp does have a lot of advantages. So C Corp is a separate entity where you're looking at it. It's not like an LLC where it's a pass-through. So what that means is for an LLC, any income you receive flows through to your individual return. Irregardless of how much money was actually sent to you, you will pick up the tax based on the income of the company. So what does that mean is for an LLC, you would have to pay tax on your 1040, and that means you got to take money out of the company to really pay that tax. While a C Corp, the taxation is hitting right on the corporate level. So you're paying tax at the corporate level. The only other change though, for a corporation, when you take out the money, it's taxed again. So that's where you hear about double taxation. The other thing is with that, if, that's how I was saying, an audit is more than likely, it's probably gonna happen when you're in the cannabis space. And under an IRS audit, if you're a C Corp, it'll just begin and end at that corp level. It won't go back, you know, further down to the individual, to your members, your shareholders. Alternatively, if you're an LLC, as is a pass-through, now you're opening yourself up for any IRS audits, any liabilities from an individual standpoint. So it does increase that scrutiny on the individual level. Now, on the other hand, LLC, much easier to start with LLC and then go to C Corp. C Corp to LLC really can't happen. There's significant tax ramifications to really do that. And then when you're looking at the tax rates, you know, C Corp is paying a flat rate, 21%. When you take the money out, typically it's going to be taxed at, you know, about 20%. Whereas for an LLC, you're being taxed at your individual marginal rate. So the highest one is 37%, but then you're also paying self-employment taxes on that. So you're paying payroll taxes on that as well. So there's really pros and cons of both of them. At the end of the day, probably the most safest one from a monetary standpoint, from a IRS audit standpoint, is really the C Corp, just because, one, like I said, the corporation's paying taxes. You don't have to worry about sending the money out to your members, make sure they have money to pay their tax share. And from an IRS standpoint, you're not going to worry about the IRS now, you know, starting at the C Corp level and going down to the shareholders and now auditing them. From that standpoint, it's, you know, it's the most protective of the two. So, you know, when you say which one's the best, like I said, they both have pros and cons. It does come down a little bit to preference, but C Corp probably does edge out the LLC just based on the protections that it provides, especially within the cannabis industry. So that's really where things stand with that. But if you, like I said, if you are an LLC already, it is very easy to convert to a C Corp, or at least much easier than the other way around. So it's not the end of the world. If you start off that way and now, you know, once you get up and running, you want to convert to that C Corp level. And with that, back to you, Todd.
Next question, what might happen to the cannabis market if it's federally legalized? This is something, again, that we're asked frequently. I do believe that there will come a time when cannabis will be federally legalized and prohibition will be lifted. I have no idea, and neither does anyone else, as to when, but it does seem, with all the states banding together and just a general populace agreeing that the prohibition should be lifted from the federal level, it's just a matter of time. What that will do to the cannabis market is that it will first open up interstate trade, so that no longer will every state have its own market, so to speak. You're going to be able to cross borders. As I mentioned earlier, as you know, there is some legislation among the states hoping that the federal government will at least consider allowing that among legal states, but also it will remove 280E. Now, if it removes 280E, because remember, 280E is dealing with drug trafficking, which, since cannabis is federally illegal, considered a Schedule I controlled substance, 280E goes away, I do believe it will be replaced by something else, by the government. What that is, I have no idea. But theoretically, it would then permit you to deduct operating expenses, which right now you're not allowed to deduct. So you're going to have a massive shift in the different markets because think about it for a minute. Where's the best place to grow cannabis? It's probably not in areas where it's cold and seasonal. It's probably better in warmer climates. And if for whatever reason cannabis sweeps the world, there's better places to grow cannabis in other parts of the world. So cultivation, I don't know where that takes you. Probably cultivation will go more towards craft cultivation. Still will be a need for dispensaries, still will be a need for manufacturing. So there's other different options there, but it will shift the market. It will also have a dramatic shift, I believe, in how cannabis is priced. Think in terms of the way you purchase your produce now. It's going to be now, instead of a local market, it's going to be a national market, maybe an international market. So the way that cannabis is priced, the way that things are going to be done in a market that's open and free nationally is much different than a local market. Remember, the way that you make money is supply and demand. And if the supply goes up and the demand goes down, well, the way that I figure it, that means that the price of goods drops. Imagine now on a national level. So there's good and bad. Also, just to mention this, if it's federally legalized, I think there will be government agencies, federal government agencies, also now involved in cannabis that currently are not. To you, Adam?
All right. So next question is, what lessons can we learn from the cannabis industry on the West Coast? So as we are aware, cannabis industry really jump-started off the West Coast. Colorado, Oregon really got off the ground back in 2014. So now we're around 9 years later at this point, and now it's really taking off on the East Coast. So the West Coast has definitely seen their fair share of issues pop up, and we are still seeing those issues as it comes across the East Coast. One of the biggest things that are out there is regarding the oversupply of product, creating a lot of volatile pricing out there. A lot of this occurs because there's a number of cultivators, more than are required, which really drives down the price for consumers, which for consumers is good, but for the rest of the industry is really a negative from that standpoint. The margins drop. A lot of times, especially as a startup, this is a very, very difficult to have those margins drop when you really need the cash to really get up and running and going. So we've seen that, across the board as the industry has moved east. Most recently now is probably Massachusetts now where that's really occurring. So really what, when you're looking at it from that standpoint, operators really need to be careful about cash forecasting, projections. Just because something's a price today doesn't mean it's going to be a price tomorrow. So you definitely need to factor in those worst case scenarios. Because unfortunately in this industry, the first couple of years we've seen, it becomes very volatile. The pricing, with the number of competitors that will enter the field, it creates a lot of, instability for the market. And as an operator, you really need to prepare for that. So like I said, really good cash forecasting projections, really keep that in mind where things are, really factor, like I said, those worst case scenarios. And then, just try and do your best to really keep, capital on hand always. Like it's a very interesting industry, but it does have its, ups and downs. And that's especially what we've been seeing in the last couple of years. A lot of the places on the West Coast, for those more mature developed markets, they had a great boom period during the pandemic. Now that's ending, they're coming to terms with that. So luckily we don't have to deal with that because the industry really didn't kick off till now. So we kind of missed that window. The other thing is, from a lesson standpoint, and is really regarding taxation. Now, as an operator, you really have no control over that. what the state really does and levies the tax. But that does impact pricing, and that really can help the illicit market really continue to thrive and develop. We've been seeing that in California where the taxes are really high. So the legal market really can't compete with the illicit market. As an operator, you really have no control over that. That's just, the situation. But, there's definitely needs to be education about that. Now that we're on the East Coast, coming here, we know what has happened on the West Coast. So as all of us in the industry really need to make sure we educate the legislators to really understand the tax situation, what that does to the industry as a whole. Because it's important to protect the legal industry and help compete against the illicit market. Unfortunately, there's going to be that competition no matter what. So it's just important to continue to educate, understand where that taxation is really doing to the market, and then hopefully course correcting to avoid any major pitfalls from that standpoint. But really the biggest one that we've seen across the board is that the volatile pricing from the supply, the oversupply. And that, like I said, is just a measure of keeping that cash supply on hand, being conservative with your projections, for your budgets, and really just preparing for that worst case scenario is probably your best, plan there. And with that, back to you, Todd.
Okay, another common question: what do investors look for when considering investing in a cannabis company? And just before I get into the specifics of that question, just know that over the past couple of years, it's been slim pickings in getting good terms and adequate capital in the cannabis industry overall. In fact, there was about a 60% drop between 2022 and 2021 in folks investing in cannabis companies. There's that little spike, but it's gone down. What folks in the M&A space are saying is that if you are investing in cannabis, it's more likely that you're going to be investing in the ancillary services, those not the plant touching companies, because it's very expensive to keep those companies going. But with that being said, if you're the right type of investment, there are investors out there. What are they looking for? I speak to a lot of investors. I go to different conferences, different friends, raising capital for folks, and myself. If I were to consider investing in a cannabis company, what would I be asking? I would be first asking who their team is. I really want to know that your team is experienced. You have people on your team that are familiar with business, people on your team who are familiar with the laws, and as well as people on your team who are familiar with the whole aspect of running a startup company. If you're on the East Coast, obviously, if you're on the West Coast, it's a little bit different. But all the startups that are coming right now, I'm going to actually bet on the jockey, not the horse, right? So I want to make sure that you have the right team. Second, I want to make sure that you really understand what you're going to be using the money for. If I get a pitch deck, if I get something in a business plan and there's just numbers there, I'm going to question what's supporting those numbers. If you're asking for a certain amount of money for your build out or your security or whatever it may be, I want to know that there are real numbers backing it. There's a support for it. It's not just something that you read on MJ Biz Daily or something like that. Did you do your due diligence? And I also want to make sure that you yourself have skin in the game of some sort, whether it's time or it's your own capital. I very rarely will an investor back someone who has no skin in the game whatsoever. So having the experience, having skin in the game, and then also I want to know that you really understand what differentiates yourself from your competition. Look, right now in the local markets that we're looking at, they're all startup. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to shine because they're going to be the first in place. But I don't want to bet on something that's short term. I want to bet on something that's going to be around for a while. And I want to know that you're going to be able to, at some point, exit, either selling to a larger company, or that you're going to be able to acquire other companies. So what is really your plan, and do you really have the ability to execute on that? Are you really auditable? Are you really starting to get things in order that you will eventually be able to be audited so that your statements can go out there and generate more capital? So those are just a few things. There's many more things that investors look for, but it's, can you distinguish yourself from your competition? Do you really have a solid team? And do you really know what you're going to be using the capital for? Those are just three just typical things that any investor is going to ask for. And yes, depending on how you answer those questions will dictate not only the availability of the capital, but also the terms. The more risk, the more reward, obviously, but also if there's more risk on my side to invest in you, I want a whole lot more in return. I want a much higher ROI. Otherwise, why would I actually invest in you? So those are some of the things that investors do look for when they're considering investing in a cannabis company. Adam?
I think that was the last of the questions we have here, but there was a good question that was asked. We need a little bit more time from the audience. So here's a question. In your estimation, what percentage of conditional licenses will convert, and what do you think the barriers would be?
The barriers to actually convert?
Yeah.
So I'll take a stab at it and you take a stab at it.
Sure.
I don't know the percentage, the actual percentage that's going to be able to convert, because I really don't know. I really don't know all the details behind the folks who apply for the conditional licenses. I hear different percentages. It's probably not going to be a high percentage. One of the barriers, besides the fact that you do need to secure, ultimately secure the real estate, which is difficult to get because you have to find a municipality that's opted in, you have to have the right zoning, and then you also have to have the capital to either acquire the property or put down some type of deposit to actually lease the property. That's one. But I'm also concerned, I think, one of the barriers, I think, is also the capital that you need to have on hand to actually execute on this. The conditional license, even a license in which you converted, doesn't mean that you're actually going to get the license. You basically get the license when you open up and they inspect the facility, whatever it may be, and that they can see that you've actually complied with what you said you were going to do. My concern in the barrier is whether or not people are going to have the capital to actually pull this off. Also, what I've been finding is, I don't know if you know this, folks, but just because you got the conditional license, now that you're going through the conversion process, those numbers in your business plans, the investigators are actually questioning that. So if you pull those numbers off the internet, or you use, some group that basically just pulled numbers off the internet, now the investigators are going to question whether or not those numbers make sense. And we've actually fielded some questions from folks who have had those issues, and they really are checking. They're not just assuming that the numbers are right. They're going to question those. So that may be a barrier, that you actually were too aggressive, too optimistic, or just your numbers didn't make sense. Yes, it did get through the conditional license period, but now as it's going through the conversion process, it looks like you may have to go back and revamp those numbers. Adam, you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that I think that the biggest barrier is capital. And I think at first the real estate got a lot of the attention because limited number of towns who opted in, they zoned them weird a lot of times, so it was limited real estate. But I think at this point, it's really the access to capital. It's really causing the most concern and issues. Some people, they seem to be able to find the real estate. It's a matter of can they afford it. And that's really the big concern right now. Now, as Todd was saying, when the state's looking at the applications, they are digging into the numbers, especially proving you have the capital to really get up and running. They're looking at what you consider to be startup costs. They're looking at your proof of funds, all that support, and if it doesn't match up, they're gonna question it and potentially turn away your application. They are, like Todd said, they are looking into it. We've had some clients has some issues. They had to provide more support for their proof of funds to support their startup costs. Basically, the state doesn't want to give applications to those who they feel like won't be able to get up and running. So they are looking at it. You know, from a percentage standpoint, it's really hard to say. Like Todd said, I agree. I think a lot of them will not ultimately get a license. And it's, like I said, it's not because of the real estate necessarily, it's because of the capital. The working capital is really not there. You have to find an investor. It's not like a traditional company where you can get a loan to hopefully get up and running. You need an outside individual. I mean, the grants will hopefully help somewhat, but it's probably not enough really for a lot of people to get up and going. So we'll see what happens with that. But it's likely to be a low number who really are able to convert, unfortunately.
I would just add, Adam, I think in the end, you will see the market begin to develop, but it's going to take some time to flush everything out and to get that capital in the market. There are many, many people that I talk to in the West Coast who are definitely coming to the East Coast, and they're seeking to set up shop here. So if you haven't been contacted by them, I'm surprised, because the West Coast folks all see the East Coast, especially the New Jersey and New York market, as being a viable market, while the West Coast seems to be drying up and having many issues. So we'll see. I do think you are going to see the cannabis marketplace, the local market in New Jersey and New York thrive, but how it gets there, we're going to see over time what it's going to take to shake things up. And I think that's it for our questions. We welcome you to email us. We have some contact information. We will be also sending out this video/audio webinar to the folks who signed up. We encourage you that if you do receive it, pass it on to other people. It will be posted on our website. We will try to continue to give you these updates so that you know what actually is happening in the federal, state, and local level. And please reach out to us if you have any specific questions concerning your own license or a situation that's come up with you, or perhaps a client of yours or a friend. We are here for you. The Sax'S Cannabis advisors strongly support the movement of the cannabis space throughout the whole nation, through the East Coast. So we want to be the accountants, the CPAs who help it actually grow and is successful in the right way. So Adam, any final words before we completely click off?
No, I mean, it's definitely going to be an interesting few months as the industry really, the adult use industry really starts, coming alive. So it's definitely going to be an interesting time, and we hope everything, develops as well as it could, and we really, are excited to see what happens next. Great.
So folks, just a closing, thank you for joining the webinar, and be tuned for our e-blasts for the things that we're publishing, and also we'll be speaking around the state and some other states as well throughout the next several months. Wish you a great day and a wonderful life.